I'm going to walk through a little bit and record a little more of the assembling a tuned port system. For those of you who haven't done this before, it's a little bit challenging because you've got all the different tubes and things, and if you don't do it in exactly the right sequence, things won't work right. So in order to make this go, before we start putting runners in, the first one is, there's a solenoid down here called, this is an EGR solenoid, and it bolts to a bracket. It bolts to the bracket right there. Right there. I choose not to bolt it there right now. I know that's where it is, but it blocks access to the distributor hold down bolt back there. Right now my pre-lube tool's in there and you can see the bolt right next to it. So I leave that loose, but you need to have the tubes run before you put the runners in or things won't go together. So you'll see out of the top of that solenoid there are two tubes. One goes to the EGR valve. This second one runs through, goes underneath, and this all comes from photographs I took of the factory car. This one, was a stock vehicle before I took it apart the first time. So I'm rerouting it the way it was 30 years ago. So the tube goes underneath here, goes underneath this rubber hose, and that rubber hose eventually will connect to the plenum. And on the other end it'll connect over to the canister. And then this other one, this one will connect, this one will connect to the bottom of the plenum. And that tube will connect there to the other tube that also sends vacuum over to the charcoal canister. It's basically just a set of vacuum tees. Other than that, things of note. The runners, you have a right and a left runner. They look real similar, but you have to be really careful because you'll see there's a port there, which I believe is exhaust gas. And if you go over on the opposite side, you have a similar looking port, and that's the port for the cold start valve. That's which solenoid fuel injector, which is in the middle of the picture right now. So the ports look similar, but they're really not. I think there are only two gaskets on this that are identical, one in the rear here and one on the opposite corner. When I took it apart, I also took the bolts and very carefully sorted them out. I have them in bags. There are bolts for the outer, for the runners on the outer, right and left. There are bolts for the plenum. And there are a couple of bolts that are called inner, that actually get fed in from the back side underneath the fuel rails, and that even makes things a little bit more challenging. Plus there are a couple special bolts, one to hold part of the throttle mechanism and one to hold the alternator bracket. So with that being the case, I'm going to start by putting gaskets in place, and these are the Fel-Pro standard gaskets. They've got little plastic tabs on the back, you can see there, that hold them in place. So step one is to get all the gaskets in place. We'll put the runners in place and get the bolts started. Then we'll get the plenum in place and get the bolts started and get connections made. What I've learned in the past is that it's not a good idea to go torque the runners to the base before you get the plenum in place, or you won't get it. It'll be too tight. So it's better to get it all in, get all the bolts lined up, and then go around and cinch them down. I'm going to put the camera back up. Okay, so we're on the left-hand side. I have the left-hand side gasket. I'll pop that guy into place. I will also note that I did not, as I've been building here, I have not connected the fuel injectors yet, because when you get into one of the torque bolts, the cables for the fuel injector harness will get in the way. You can move them and you can work around them, but it's easier to me if they're not connected at all. And then you can simply push them a little bit sideways out of the way. I think that one's in. Take a double look here. Yep, good. Okay. Well, that's gaskets for the left. Take a look here at gaskets for the right. You get one in here, like so. And this one with a little dog leg in it goes on this side. Okay. So then these all take a T40 socket. T40 Torx, different lengths. I've got a short, real shorty that I can put into any socket. And I've got kind of the standard Craftsman versions. So I'm on the left-hand side. Here's the left-hand side outers. Pull those bolts out. There are 5 of them. And we have 2 long ones and 3 short ones. And if you look at the bottom of the rails, you've got some of these where they're long and you've got some where they're short. So the 2 go together. We have to be careful here that when I'm all done, we have to tighten up this cold start injector. I've left the tube connected, but I've loosened the nut. And what we try to do right now is sneak these guys in. This is why I said the wiring harnesses can get in the way. So we'll push the wiring harnesses all back. I said I didn't need to take out the cold start injector, but I'm going to anyway. It has an O-ring type connection in the back. I thought I got it out of there the first time without doing that. holes lined up here. Doesn't seem to want to start. Okay. Now let's get a short one in up on top. Then we want to get one down the back here. Okay, there's a long and a short in the back. And then now is when I need to put the cold start injector back in. And it goes in the back. Hard to see, I know. That has to be rethreaded. And then on this end, more slack in this harness so I can get that snuck down in there. Okay. Drop that one in. And the cold start injector has its own O-ring in addition to it being held in by one of the bolts. So you kind of have to give it a shove. Make sure that it seats down in there, which it feels like it is. So I think it's a short bolt. it's got a little slack in it, but it's there. Now we go around to the other side. And we do the same type of thing. Drop lights never stay where you want them to, it seems. Okay. This one slides in a little easier. I go to my outer bolts. And this one, as I said before, the front one is special. It's basically a short bolt, but it has a stud on it because the bracket for the alternator goes under it. Now, maybe not every model year does this, but in this one, which is an 85, it does. So which is one of the reasons that the alternator didn't get mounted yet, is I wanted to have room to get in there and torque on that. Put a little short one here. Okay. Two long ones. These get a little bit more tricky because this one's got the air pump in the way. So go straight in on this one. And the valve covers are designed so that you can get these bolts in without with clearance to the valve cover. If you had a high performance valve cover, I'm not sure how that would work out. So we do that, and then we usually use a universal joint on this one that's got the air pump solenoids in the way. Alright, I'll get those guys. Now I mentioned the ones on the back side. These are kind of the inner ones. Take the camera down again. So on the lower part of the runner, I back this off. Right there, or right there, depending on how you want to look at it. There's the runner, and here's the intake manifold. And here's the bolt, and it goes in from the back side. You have to spin that guy in and torque it. They just couldn't, they didn't have a place to put that one from the front. So there's one there. Which gets to be a little fun to get your wrench through here to torque it. There's one on the left-hand side, the same way. Get that connection out of the way. But there's one right down here. Underneath basically underneath or behind the fuel pressure regulator. Roll that guy in. Now, then you have gaskets for the plenum, and they're different. This one's the right-hand side, and I believe it actually has an R in it. And if you look closely at it, it has a little bit of a cut here. Corresponds to a little bit of a chamfer there. And so then you snap these little plastic guys in there to hold them in place. And we can do and again, they look close, but they aren't identical. And so you have to be very careful that you don't get yourself into trouble by putting the wrong one on the wrong side. But these are really nice with the little plastic buttons. Again, at this point, you want to make sure that the EGR is hooked up. This is really hard to hook up this hose. Once you get the plenum on, there isn't room to get your hand underneath to reach in. When we put the plenum on, there's a connector here that goes to a switch on the underside of the plenum, so you have to reach underneath and snap that one up. This is the fuel pressure regulator, and it goes to a vacuum port. There are several other vacuum hoses that'll come in. So I'm going to get the plenum up here next. So here's the plenum upside down. You can see the ports on the sides, the throttle body, and IAC and the TPS are installed. I didn't disassemble that. This is the connection you have to make underneath when you flip it upside down, or right side up, depending on how you want to take a look at that. And here are some of the vacuum ports. See, that one's power brakes. The fuel pressure regulator hits on one of these. The ports in the front up here on the manifold, that one that's sticking up, this one right here, will connect here once we get things flipped over. So I'm going to set the camera back on the stand. I think it'll be easier to reach. Get this one connector and snap it in. There we go. And let me sneak this guy down in between. And connectors need to be out of the way. That hose needs to be out of the way. This one. Just a moment. Just need to reorient that. This one needs to be on top. And we'll go ahead and make that connection now. Knocked my gasket off, unfortunately. Sure, I'm all okay here. Okay. Sometimes it's a lot of fun getting these started. There we go. They are aluminum, so you have to be careful to finger start them and not get them cross-threaded. They're fine thread, aluminum bolt, aluminum bosses in the Got a couple there. Let me try the other side. What I did the last time I did this, or I should say the first time I did this, was I torqued those lower bolts because it's so much easier to access them. And then this was too tight to be able to drop the plenum in between the gaskets without damaging the gaskets. So I ended up going back and loosening everything up and starting over. Oh, I don't want that one in there because that's the wrong place. Some of these bolts are a little hard to get started because they're actually not square to the world, if you will. This one in the back in particular is, the flange has an angle to it. It doesn't go in quite straight. So it's a little extra fun getting that bolt to start. Try this one. This is the special one for the throttle linkage. It holds the throttle cables. goes. Earlier I said I was going to put the distributor in before I did the plenum because it's easier. Again, it's a sequence for access to things. But then I realized I had marks here on the plenum. I've got tape and reference marks for where the rotor should line up and be set when I go and put the distributor back in. So for now, that's that. This is another one that's got a little bit of an angle to it. You have to be very careful how you thread that one in there or it won't start. There we go. Got it. About halfway. Alright. And all of these need to get torqued into 25 foot-pounds. And I'm going to stop the recorder for now and go through and torque these all down. As I'm finishing getting these runners back on the car, just a couple of notes about torque. It's hard to find torque specs. I found some online. My factory shop manual actually, believe it or not, the pages were missing or not finished that showed the torque of the runners to the plenum and the runners to the intake manifold. It was an early copy and I haven't been able to find it. So anyway, I went online and I started looking for torque specs. And there are some conflicts. The torque specs, I found two bands really. One says 15 to 20 foot-pounds, and the other one, which I think is more recent, says 25. Being that these bolts are going into aluminum, you really want to be a little bit careful. And my bias would be to go a little bit toward the higher torque, but I think you need to be careful. So this is my regular click-stop torque wrench. Its bottom end actually is 25. And I think on these bolts you want to have a little bit of feel to it. So I went back to using my, call it an older school here, beam style wrench that lets you watch how much torque you can build. And not being sure which torque value is actually correct, I aimed to be kind of in the 20 to 25 range. So the goal is, I couldn't find a pattern, but the normal pattern would be to start at the center and work your way out on the bolts. And then using this wrench, where you can see torque the bolts, bring them up easy. What I did actually, this is what I did actually, was bring them up easy, work your way around, kind of bring them up in steps. I mean, the first step around is about 15, and then I was aiming to see if I could get toward 25, and some of them I actually did get to 25, and some of them the torque seemed to level off, And the risk in aluminum is that you'll pull the threads out of the part that you're torquing to and end up with a mess and having to go back to helicoil or otherwise fix threads. So the real key here is go ahead, torque them up, but I had several that I didn't feel comfortable beyond about 20 to 22, and so that's where I stopped. And if you choose to do this, just a caution, try to use the right wrench, because you could strip them out before you get to where you set your click stop wrench. And so far that got mine in. I've got them up to between 20 and 25 on all the bolts. They're holding steady, and we'll move on to the next step.